At Jackson Water, we are in the game and locked in on our goals. Every day, our dedicated teams are hard at work, ensuring that clean, reliable water flows to every home and business in Jackson. We are not just fixing pipes. We're investing in a brighter, more resilient future for our city. Jackson Water, water for all the time.
Hi, and welcome to Wlbt Plus on this Friday, a very special edition of the Digital News Desk, because I'm joined here by Jerry Mitchell, who should need no introduction if you live in Mississippi, if you're from Mississippi, if you follow news in any shape, form, or fashion. Of course, Jerry is so well known for the work that he's done over just decades in the state, and we're so happy to have you here, Jerry.
Good to be with you, CJ.
And I've got to ask you, some of the reasons why we're here today, obviously, from past reporting and also future reporting that we hope to be doing on a very, very serious subject, which is it all stems from officer misconduct, police misconduct.
Right.
You and Mississippi Today had been on the forefront of reporting on the Goon Squad as this story came to light from, and we're seeing the pictures of the 6 individuals, the 5 former Rankin County deputies and a former Richland police investigator who all pleaded guilty to state and federal charges. But, at the beginning of this, all we had were 2 people who came forward to their attorneys initially saying that this mistreatment happened.
Right.
Didn't really know how far back this was going to go at first.
Yeah. And initially, actually, the response was, oh, this is not what really happened. Like, you know what I mean? The initial response from law enforcement was oh, no, that's not what happened. And there was some kind of alternative version of what took place. But of course, then we found out that was a lie.
It was like a cover story.
It was.
And you look back on that, and I hate to draw parallels. And for those who aren't familiar, of course, back in January of last year, deputies responded to a house in the Braxton community on Connerly Road. And over the course of a period of hours, abused and tortured, sexually assaulted 2 black men, Michael Corey Jenkins and Eddie Terrell Parker. This culminated with an incident, a portion of the incident where Jenkins was shot in the mouth.
Yeah, it was like a mock execution gone wrong, basically. So.
And then, of course, the cover-up that followed.
Exactly.
I drew parallels from what we first heard from the Rankin County Sheriff's Department to the George Floyd situation, where after George Floyd's death, the Minneapolis Police Department sends out this very tame, very misleading press release about what happened. And then, of course, we learned that the truth was much more sinister, much more heinous.
Right. Exactly. The video, of course, came out of short order, and that gave a whole different picture. And of course, these guys pleaded guilty, and that was when there was a press conference, I think, by the sheriff actually in June, I believe it was, of 2023. And that was the first inkling. Like he said, he'd fired some of these gentlemen, but he still didn't have the full story. It wasn't really until August when they plead guilty that we began to really get a picture of what all was taking place. Although our reporting actually began before that. So.
That's right. And I mean, and you, and again, to mention Brian Howie and Nate Rosenfeld.
They did a phenomenal job with all this reporting, for us at Mississippi Today. And also we work with the New York Times, of course.
When those rumblings first came out about this being much more than what the press release was, I think we had heard a little bit of that. And then we heard this from the attorneys, of course, representing both Parker and Jenkins. And of course, even then, and I hate to say this, but even then, you've been doing this a while. You take what attorneys say with a grain of salt sometimes, because they're making a case, and we have to vet things.
Yeah, and you're thinking, well, they're filing a lawsuit, and et cetera, and they're so you don't know. You just don't know what the truth is. It's not that you're downplaying that or discounting that. You're just trying to find the truth, and that's kind of what our job is, just to get at the truth.
I think it's one of those rare occasions where the truth was actually worse than what initially came out.
Actually, that's true. I mean, the details on what happened there were just horrifying. And of course, we began kind of finding out about this in June, like we started getting information. Brian and Nate started working for us in June, and that's when we first started getting inclinations end of June of, hey, wait a minute, this was not just an isolated incident. This is a whole series of incidents that took place over basically about a 20-year period that we were able to document.
Yeah. I remember at some point we had asked for body camera logs to try to see whether or not
happened.
Right, to see if anybody was recording. And at that time we didn't know who all the officers were. We were still, I feel like we were all sort of trying to figure that out before we actually knew. We were trying to see if we could, because obviously once we start getting details of the federal investigation, all that will come out. We were trying to find out beforehand. And I remembered that sobering moment when we're looking at those logs and seeing that no deputies were using, there was no body camera footage.
There was no body camera footage at all
during that entire time frame. And
you knew that's a big red flag, obviously.
Yeah. It was a very sobering situation too, because Jerry, you know this from working here, and you never can, you have to take people at face value, even in these elected positions, in these positions of authority. And we're saying this with full knowledge that Brian Bailey is still the sheriff of Rankin County. And all of this happened under his watch, whether he, at least the Goon Squad situation, whether he knew about it and was complicit or it happened without him knowing about it.
Right.
Neither looks good.
Correct.
And now the department is dealing with the aftermath.
Right. And now there's a Justice Department investigation into policies and practices. Now that's a civil investigation, but obviously whatever they find there could actually be used in a criminal investigation as well.
It's interesting too, because I know just from being a reporter here just over the last decade, you hear stories all the time about things happening in Rankin County. And at the same time, when somebody tells you that, but we don't really have documentation or something to follow up with it, well, is it just talk? What's going on? There's got to be some truth to it. You look back now through this lens of seeing the horror that was described by these two men and what happened that night, and even what you and Nate and Brian uncovered with the history of this, of other cases.
It's been going on for a number of years. It's not a one-time event. And in fact, you can even tell that from the text from that night. Is everybody up for a mission? So that's, when you start using words like mission and things like that, it's pretty obvious that this is not, a singular event. And the way they did it, almost with precision, took out the security cameras, broken the door without, having a warrant and those kinds of things, or obvious things that they had done before. It seems obvious to me they'd done before.
They had a drop gun. They were ready to plant.
They had a drop gun. They had drugs to plant. They had everything. And instead of planting the gun, they ended up staging it to make it look like he had actually shot at them or aimed the gun at them.
Yeah. And the difficulty I think sometimes for us as journalists is when we tell these stories too, that we sometimes will get a large degree of pushback initially before we knew the scope of this, before we knew that it was actually worse than what the lawyers were saying. People would roll their eyes and say, oh, here it is, another police misconduct story. But while many of the officers out there and the majority may be on the straight and narrow, you're going to have bad apples. And sometimes the bad apples are incredibly bad.
Yeah, and that's what happened in this case. This was obviously not just a one-time event. This was a series of practices, and that's one of the reasons that we're doing this call out. We're working with you guys, and Wlbt and Mississippi Today are cooperating in this kind of call out to because we know there are other stories as well that we weren't able to get to. I mean, we found the ones that we found, Brian and Nate found, were mainly just kind of going from one case to the next. Say, oh, well, let me tell you about this case.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, I know somebody else. That just kind of word of mouth situation. But obviously, there are many others. It's pretty obvious.
That's right, and that kind of brings us to kind of why Jerry's here with us today. Of course, we appreciate him being here, and we want to invite you back at any opportunity.
Sure,
too, because
absolutely.
You're a wealth of knowledge here, and I'm not saying this to Jerry. Jerry hasn't paid me before the interview,
Yeah.
But Jerry, when you talk, whether it's through interviews, the sit down, your words on paper, people listen. You have built up a tremendous amount of credibility over the last several decades. I mean, anybody who can put in their resume that they've helped get, Klansmen put behind bars. It's phenomenal work. It's much needed work in Mississippi. Cases like this show how much more work there is still left to do.
Yeah. And that was the thing going into this. I, was of the mindset that this sort of behavior had stopped decades ago.
Yeah.
And then you realize what never really stopped. And that's pretty horrifying to know that look, Mississippi's a pro law enforcement state. And therefore there's always a belief that, the law enforcement officer is telling the truth, or that, that they're acting on best behavior. And to have this kind of thing, and obviously not a one-time event, but multiple events is pretty horrifying.
Well, the whole concept of qualified immunity goes back to that. I mean,
exactly.
You think about all the things the considerations that law enforcement officers are given before a complaint rises to the level where somebody can take action against that officer, against that department. It's a very high road, a very high standard.
Very high standard. And in fact, Judge Reeves, federal judge, has just questioned, about that philosophy, that standard that essentially allows law enforcement to evade litigation and things like that.
Yeah. Jerry mentioned it, but I want to give a little more detail to those of you watching. What we're doing is we're partnering with Mississippi Today, and it's what's called a call out. We're basically looking to you. We mentioned a little bit about this yesterday and kind of teasing that Jerry would be here, but if you or someone has had an incident or something happen regarding Rankin County law enforcement, and we're not talking just about the sheriff's department here.
Right.
We want to hear from you. We want to hear your story. If you feel like your rights have been violated, if you feel like something happened during an arrest, during a stop, even when you were just driving through,
right,
it doesn't even matter. If something happened where you felt like your rights were violated, where these officers may have used excessive force, where something happened that you feel was unlawful, you have opportunities to let us know. And those opportunities are on your screen. You can actually scan that QR code on the bottom right corner to take you to a special link where you can fill out a form, give us information here. Keep in mind here that, you don't have to, giving us your information doesn't come with a promise that you have to be interviewed by us or anything.
Right.
We're hoping that through this effort, we can find out more about these officers who are doing things that, because again, for these 6 that have already been punished, former officers, there are others out there. And if nothing else, this just showed the prevalency of the problem in this part of the state.
Well, and I think Brian and Nate's reporting, for example, they identified 20 different officers just within the incidents that they were able to document, the kind of terrorizing, incidents that took place. So it was obviously beyond the 6, and I think that's one of the things we want to look at as well.
Yeah, but we can't do that without, again, getting information from you at home, and if you have information that you want to be able to get to us, and we can check out and investigate further. And if you do want to talk to us about what's happened, that certainly is a possibility too. But we want to hear from you, and we want to be able to share your stories and do something about it, frankly. Jerry's reporting, Nate and Brian, others in Mississippi too. I think of, oh gosh, now I'm blanking on his name from the AP. Why can I not?
Michael.
There we go. Michael's going to get on to me because I couldn't remember his name. But Michael's been doing, Michael Goldberg has been doing amazing work. But we can't do that without people. We can't do anything without tips.
Yeah, we can't do it without information. And this is the way I typically think about it is, you have to have truth in order to have justice. And even if you can't have complete justice, you can still have truth. And that's why I think with the role that we play, you and CJ and Wlbt and Mississippi Today and other media folks out there, that why the role that we play is so important.
That's right. That's right. Did you say you had some Facebook comments or some questions? So this is from Sharon Alexander McInnes, who says, "Are you kidding me? 20 years these clowns been doing this stuff, and nobody took action until now." And
That's accurate.
to your point, that's
Yeah,
right.
That's accurate. I mean, we put it this way: we documented cases that covered 20 years, and we're talking like stuff that sounds like way over the top, like using a blowtorch and melting metal on someone, which sounds like made up. If I'm be frank as a reporter, my initial instinct to that is like, oh, surely that's made up, but actually, there's there's proof of that actually. So.
It's a lot. It's a lot to take in. I think it was really difficult to stomach that the bill of information.
Oh, it was awful.
That came out regarding the Goon Squad.
I mean, they were, in addition to what all you described, they were using racial slurs.
Yeah.
They were saying these are two young black men and these are white officers, and they're using the N-word at them, and they're saying you need to go back across the river and all these kinds of things. And so it's pretty brutal. Having
a contest to see who could tase someone the most.
Yeah, they did that, and it's just beyond the pale. I mean, I've covered a lot of stories in Mississippi over the years, but I have to say, in terms of police misconduct, this is by far the worst I've ever dealt with or really read about. I even read about, in terms of, now obviously George Floyd, you had a death there, but that was kind of a singular event. It appeared to be,
Yeah.
And in this case, we're talking about years and years of activities going on. So.
And it extends not only, I think one of the most shocking things too, was that initially, because of the racial component, because of the slurs, because of the things that were used, people thought that this was used almost exclusively toward Black Mississippians, Black residents in Lincoln County. But what you found, it was.
Yeah, I can say what we found, Brian and Nate found in their reporting, a tremendous number of white victims. And I might add as well, I mean, the mugshots of these, of the people being brought in, it's not like you can't see the mugshot and see that they've been beaten up. I mean, they make it very obvious. If you go onto those stories and look at them, it's under, it's called Unfettered Power. If you go on Mississippi Today website, it's Unfettered Power, Mississippi Sheriffs. And you can look for yourself, look at some of the mugshots that are in that story that Brian and Nate did. It's just terrific.
It's horrible. And you got another Facebook comment. So this is from the Mike Magazine, who regularly checks us out on Facebook, and it's good to hear from you. I'm finding in my research, Jerry, that a lot of these higher ups were trained by some folks in the Goon Squad and now are agents in MBI and other agencies allegedly. Yeah. It's a good point.
That may be true. I'll take your word for it. But yeah, it's certainly, we know Brett McAlpin was training these guys,
right?
And he was anyway, we know that.
I think they kind of speak to also the fact that when you have officers where this conduct maybe gets them removed from the department quietly, they go work somewhere else.
Well, that's been one of the problems. That's been one of the problems. And I know the legislature tried to address this with a law this year, but essentially you have, but it doesn't completely address it. You have someone that leaves a department and goes somewhere else, but hopefully the law can help take care of that, because they're going to actually have an investigator available to them through this board where they can actually investigate whether someone needs to have their certification taken away. So obviously that would be helpful, although I might go ahead and say, you don't have to be a certified law enforcement to be a sheriff in Mississippi.
Yeah.
In fact, the only requirement to be sheriff in Mississippi is you can't be an atheist. So that's literally the law in Mississippi. You just can't be an atheist. It doesn't matter about your qualifications, but you just don't be an atheist. So.
Well, there's a church on every corner, and we're known for our strong faith. We live in a Bible Belt, so
some aspects of the mentality of that.
That's
but
right.
It's in terms of when it was passed, but that is kind of interesting.
probably need more qualifications than
I would
that.
think being certified should be a requirement.
Oh my goodness. I think back to when we were looking, and both Jerry and I had reported on this case of an individual, Stephen Frederick, who was a former Capitol police officer who was involved in a DUI in Covington County.
Right.
Wrecked out. Blood alcohol level was
0.17. Is that
yeah,
what
it was
like
it was
that?
high. It was
6,
one,
something
almost
like that.
1.5 times the legal limit. And
Yeah.
he, of course, they took care of it quietly. He was is no longer with Capitol Police, obviously, but he's working for Scott County now.
That's right.
He had taken a break for a little bit, and that's not to say that. Certainly not trying to say that somebody makes a mistake, they're not entitled to get back and have another chance at law enforcement again. We're not saying there are plenty of people where something happens, they get off the beaten path, they get back
there's
on.
more to that story,
That's true,
as you well know.
There is, and in a lot of these cases, you have people that will get on at these departments because somebody's taking care of them, and they want to let them know.
Well, like in that case, you had what happened was Sheriff Bailey actually called a prosecutor and asked him, "Hey, what would happen if the trooper didn't show up for the DUI case?" And that's what happened.
Yeah, and it happens a lot more than you would think. When
I'm not supposed to be a part of this, but I'm blown away when stuff I'm hearing.
Yeah, it's
Oh, I mean, you don't, it's just justice shouldn't be blind, as they often talk about. I mean, it shouldn't be who knows who or favors to so and so or whatever it is.
No, it shouldn't be. Here's another question from Haley.
Haven't other victims come out? Yeah, we've had some. And since our call out, which we began at some days back, we've already had some other people reach out beyond just what. And I might add, Brian and Nate, they documented, I think, 17 different cases with 22 victims, but there were far more than that we had information about. So, yeah.
I want to mention something while we have this on the screen. You can't see it at the bottom, so I'm going to read it to you. We said, obviously, the information you share with us, if you want to talk with us more about that on the record, you can, but I want you to know that your identity will remain confidential unless you don't.
That's right.
Unless you want that
unless
to be
you want it
released.
Out. Yeah.
Any information you share with WLBT will be shared with Mississippi Today and vice versa. And this is one way for us to be able to leverage our resources to be able to hear from you and hopefully root out more cases of this happening. And we say Rankin County here, but 82 counties in the state.
Yeah, this isn't limited. I think if any idea that this is limited to Rankin County or even limited to Mississippi, if I'm going to be real honest.
Sure.
It's the unfortunate thing. I mean, just a real simple example. The Justice Department, had these guidelines on not kneeling on people's necks and backs all the way back in 1995. And they've still not followed that. I mean, people just over and over again, not just in Mississippi, where I know that Robert Loggins died basically as a result of this, up in Grenada, but many other places across the United States where you've had these kind of incidents take place. So it's not restricted to Mississippi by any stretch.
I think back to the Keith Muriel case. Keith Muriel was he died after being placed in a patrol car and was not checked on by Jackson police officers. This case happened more than a year ago. It's currently the 3 officers who were indicted. It's working its way through. We should start to see trial, I think, maybe next month for a couple of them. But, he was placed in restraints on his stomach. Correct. With his hands behind his back.
Well, that's what they say in that
the prone position. Yeah.
Anytime you put somebody in the prone position, you decrease the air that they can get to their lungs if you pull their arms back behind them.
Yeah.
It just makes sense. Just do it yourself, and you realize, oh, wait a minute, you can't breathe and that's why they say don't leave them on their stomach.
That's right.
You're supposed to roll them over.
And at that point, he had already been tased dozens of times. And,
that also can affect health. Taser is sometimes thought of as a they often like to call it non-lethal weapon, but it can even be lethal. Like if someone has a heart condition or other things like that. Or the other thing is it can incapacitate you and you can fall.
Right.
So
you've done, and Mississippi Today has done some reporting regarding taser logs too, and kind of the directions where that takes you. Can you talk a little bit about that, Jim?
Yeah, sure. What we did, Brian and Nate did, we worked with big local news and New York Times on it. Basically, so we had these people saying they were tased repeatedly. And then we would get, there wouldn't be a use of force report when we asked for the file or whatever. So therefore it was like, well, it's their word against the sheriff's department that this had taken place. So we were able to get the taser logs for Rankin County and analyze those. And then we were able to match those up with those people, you know, and the times and dates when it took place and find out, oh, wait a minute, they were telling the truth. You know, they didn't file a use of force report on this, which they were supposed to. And sure enough, tasing did take place. So we're able to document that. And then we did the opposite. We were able to take, Big Local developed an algorithm whereby it analyzed all those taser logs to basically spot, you know, possible torture. And so then we went and interviewed those particular, used the jail log, matched those up, and then figured out, okay, and there were typically all these were drug cases. So then they went and analyzed that and looked at it. And that's how we were able to determine even more cases. People
wonder why it takes so long sometimes to put together stories. It's because these puzzle pieces are in so many different areas.
Yeah.
And the state's public records system, or public records
let's
Act,
talk public records law here.
doesn't really allow you. There are certain records that it's very difficult, if not impossible, to get. And so you have to figure out other ways creatively to get access to that.
And even the ones you're entitled to, it's often a battle to get those records, or they want to charge you thousands of dollars for the records, or sometimes they don't. Like the tasers, for example, Brian and Nate are now going around and actually helping sheriff's departments download their taser logs, because people don't even know how to download the taser logs. They've never even looked at them. So you think about that. If you're not looking at taser logs, I mean, how do you have any idea of what's going on, or how they're being used? And those things, you know, they're actually meant for trying to, you know, corral people, getting people. They're not meant for you to just buzz someone because they won't obey an order or something like that. And that's often what it's kind of devolved into, is they say, well, you won't obey my order, you know, and then if they keep resisting, I keep tasing them. And the problem I see, like the Robert Loggins case, for example, in that case, I mean, the guy had taken meth. He was out of his mind. He's talking about Jesus and all this other kind of stuff. He's clearly out of his mind, and they kept tasing him and tasing him. And then they started beating him with a flashlight. And it's like, guys, what are you doing? And then they kneeled on him, his back and his neck, and he died. He never breathed again.
Do you think that, as we talk about public records, body cameras are sold to us as this catch-all for bad conduct when agencies adopt and start carrying these, get the money for it, get the money for the storage, and they start implementing them.
Right.
But unless the public gets the chance to see this, unless you have policies that allow the public to even get access to it,
correct,
how do you know that it's actually being used to keep these officers in line?
Well, that's part of the problem is, you know, I mean, to use kind of the trite phrase, the fox guarding the hen house, or whatever you want to call it. You've got the people watching it. We have to trust them, you know, and we're finding out sometimes, you know, you trust but verify, you know what I mean? And I think that's one of the things why it's important that public records of body cam footage and things like that should be public, just from a perspective of, oh, okay, wait a minute, look what this person did, you know, whereas, which I think makes far more impact. I think that's one of the things that you guys do that's so great, is people can see it visually and just like, oh man, they see it for themselves. You know, they don't have to, there's no questions about, they saw Jacob Blake being shot in the back, you know, 7 times or whatever it is. Yeah.
I can count on my left hand how many times we've gotten body camera footage from an agency when we've requested it. There have been times they've offered it up. In the Keith Muriel case, they offered it up freely. They've offered it up before. MHP has a couple of times when something's happened. I think the only agency that we actually requested and got body camera footage from them was from the Byram Police Department when we were investigating John Sullivan a couple of years ago for a DUI arrest. We've been
Right.
denied by the city of Pearl. We've been denied by the city of Jackson,
Right.
multiple agencies, Hattiesburg and others. And even in some cases can't even get the body camera policy to show when they can be used and when they can't. The chain of
Yeah.
command, how these, when you can mute a microphone on the body camera, for example. And so there's so many questions and so many ways that needs to be improved. I don't know if legislators will ever adopt anything more to make that more.
Well, the more transparency, whether we're talking about police or anybody, government generally, I mean, the more transparency there is, the better. It's just, and that's the only way you can have a democratic republic operating, is to have this kind of information, because the public's in the dark. You know, what can you do? How do you vote? You know, those kinds of things.
Yeah, what Sylvia is saying there, cameras are paid for with public funds. They should be public at all times.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I think Mississippi needs a much better and stronger public records law.
The way they couch it too is they'll say that from the moment the body camera is recording, it's an investigative record, and for
Right.
us, investigative record means off limits. Unfortunately, in the state, it's an exempt record. We can't get it if it's investigative.
Yeah, and some of I'll give a simple example of what I think is a ridiculous thing. You realize, like, let's say son or daughter either disappears or was murdered or whatever, and that family, like, let's say case goes unsolved. Okay, no one gets prosecuted. Or let's say they disappeared. Anyway, whatever it is, the family is never entitled to that record. Like, just forget the public aspect of it. If the law enforcement decides, no, it's still open, you know, because anything that's like a murder and unsolved, that's technically open in some way. Then they can just keep that file from, you know, maybe they suspect there's some kind of relationship between the sheriff and the suspect, or, you know, there's some kind of, you know, something went on. They still can't, the family cannot get that file. I mean, it's crazy. And I know now situations which this is what they're actually entitled to, but they can't get autopsies, for example.
Yeah.
Families are entitled to autopsy, but they sometimes won't give them to them. They'll say it's under investigation. It's like, well, they're entitled to know how their loved one died.
That's right.
And so it just, there needs to be a lot more transparency in Mississippi. And I think that's how you keep a government honest. You keep a law enforcement honest and get you to realize the realization this is transparent. I may be seen on this body cam for what I'm doing is another layer of helping to ensure that people act correctly and that they don't violate the law themselves.
That's right. There's a comment or a question from the Mike magazine. I think it was at 1:25 p.m. It's near the top, saying this was a good question about law enforcement whistleblowers. Are they welcome here in Mississippi if they want to come forward?
Well, certainly they're welcome to come forward. You know, certainly with us, we will, you know, keep their identities, you know, conceal those. And yeah,
and it happens sometimes. It's not as common. Well, it might be. Jerry's been in this a little bit longer.
No,
you've got impeccable sources, but I'm saying sometimes
they should have a better law here, a
right.
whistleblower law in Mississippi. That there is a whistleblower law, I believe, but it's not the strongest.
But I mean, if somebody wanted to come forward, you'll get law enforcement officers who will come forward and tell you something off the record, and will say, and in a lot of cases too, they will do so and they'll say, well, we're just trying to root this out. We don't want this to be out there. And they resent the fact that this bad behavior exists in their department or in one that they are familiar with in another agency somewhere.
Well, the people who are working in these departments, Rankin County Sheriff's Department or others that I've talked to, they hate bad cops because of what happens. You know what I mean? The bad behavior, I'll put it that way, like this, that besmirches all of them, they feel like. And therefore they want to root it out. They don't want it to just persist.
I remember we were covering a trial and I was talking to a couple of bailiffs with Rankin County, and it was like somebody had, like, the morale was at an all-time low. This was shortly after the Goon Squad.
I'm
Pleas.
still hearing that
Yeah.
from from deputies that I know, or former deputies that I know.
And it's an unfortunate. At the same time, the department has to come out of this. I say stronger, but hopefully within the bounds of the law, and root out these bad actors.
It's going to be, Rankin County Sheriff's Department has a very difficult task on their hands right now, I think, in terms of not just what they're dealing with on the outside, but what they're dealing with on the inside in terms of morale, how people feel about what's going on. Morale is pretty, at least what I hear, is low. It's just from individuals, so they may just be their particular mentality about it, but you can understand. They've got to feel like they're under fire. Justice Department's investigating them now. Now, it is a civil investigation, but nonetheless,
I don't think they've seen the full extent of legal action from individuals either, have they? I mean,
well, you've already got the lawsuit, that Parker and Jenkins have filed.
That's right, the civil suit,
and
I think there's
there already are multiple other lawsuits out there and litigation out there.
Yeah,
it's I wish nothing bad on Rankin County, but this is potentially going to be real, from a monetary standpoint, could be very costly to them.
That's right. It's and it's one of those things that people probably don't say this to you, Jerry. They might, but I sometimes will get, when I go out, well, why are you always doing the negative stories? And I say, well, our hope is when we put out stories, investigations that talk about some of the worst things that are happening, corruption, officer misconduct, things of this nature, the hope is that something positive comes from it. The hope is that this will help root out whatever is going on, and we will course correct.
Yeah, I think it's what, as I mentioned earlier, you've got to have truth before you have justice. I mean, I think you've got to have these. That's what you need for a democracy to operate. You've got to have the truth out there, because otherwise, if it's all lies, how do you, or you don't have the information? How do you know what to do? And I think it's a whole nother topic for another day. But Mississippi doesn't do a very good job of keeping track of data overall, or if they have data, it's what I would call dirty data.
Yeah.
And therefore Mississippi doesn't even know itself what is happening sometimes. And I think that can lead to bad decisions. I mean, you want to have all good information at your hands if you're a leader, whether you're the governor or whoever you are. You want to have good information at hand, and if you're not keeping track, you're not really keeping track of this data in a good and timely way, then it's hard to make good decisions.
That's right. And part of it too is, every time there's a public meeting that comes up, there's a supervisors meeting or a city meeting, we don't have enough reporters to cover all of these. And it's so important for folks to get out there and be involved in your community and what's going on in your local government. If something sounds crazy, look into it further, call us, let us know.
Right.
Request records yourself, because anybody in the state we don't have some special power. We can request public records.
We're just a member of the public. Anybody in the public can ask for these same records. Which I'm kind of mystified. Like I said, sometimes you get these, they want thousands of dollars for these public records. It's just, one we just asked for is basically the cost worked out to be $10 a report per report. And it's just like, really, does it cost that much to print them out or send them by PDF? Actually, we'd rather have them electronically.
I remember a couple of times that I'd requested records and they were going to charge so much to duplicate them that I just said, can I just show up and scan it with my phone?
I've done that.
And they'd be like, okay, that's fine. And it'll tie me up for 4 hours, but it saves us a couple of $100. So
I've done that.
Yeah.
I showed up at the health department one time with a scanner. There were so many records. I said, can I just show up? Can I just bring my scanner in and just scan these? And they went, okay. So I showed up with a scanner. It was like a stack of reports that I scanned and made PDFs of. So,
but sometimes we have to do that, and it's not that you're just trying to throw a whole bunch of work on somebody else. You're just trying to get the records for yourself because they're the people's
well, yeah,
records.
they're the it's information from the people.
Yeah.
You know, it's not. Yes, we're writing it for stories, for our publications, but yeah, it's for the public.
I'm excited to see what this is going to bring out.
Yeah, and we've already had, I might add, a number of people that have already reached out to tell us different stories, and it's just horrific to think you have a law enforcement, or at least a segment of a particular law enforcement agency, where they're, torturing and mistreating people, breaking in without warrants, those kinds of things. And you wonder, for example, how many wrongful convictions have been in this case? How many other crimes have been committed? So these are the kinds of questions I think that obviously it raises.
I mean, if I'm the DA and I'm looking at this, I'm thinking there could be a mountain of paperwork of going back through and looking at all these cases. I don't envy Bubba Bramlett's job right now because of a lot of that. Some of the fallout
probably
that could
only
happen
going to look
this.
at. They looked at all the pending ones. They're not going to look at past ones unless someone flags it or something like that. Probably.
Do you think they should? I mean, I guess.
Well,
maybe
I
they don't
think
have
that's
the
a great.
manpower.
I think it's a great question. I mean, I think, and you probably would need to go back and do it some kind of systematic way, not rather than just relying on people to say, "Oh yeah, I got wrongfully convicted." Because you think about it, if it was a regular habit to break in people's houses, for example, any evidence they seized, it doesn't matter if they actually had drugs. Actually, what matters is if they broke in without a warrant, then that evidence is inadmissible, and therefore they couldn't have been convicted, and therefore that case should be tossed out. So those are the kind of questions that you're going to wind up with.
Yeah. And it really is sort of needle in a haystack reporting. You talk about the taser logs and helping to identify specific cases sometimes, or even give credence to cases you're already looking at, give credibility to that, reinforce what you're already suspecting. But so often, and that's why hearing from you and getting your tips are so important, so incredibly important, because we have to have some sort of thread to start pulling. Yes. We've got to know where to look, and it's so difficult when you don't have that. And you know that things are happening. You know that there's like there are counties where we know things are happening, but until we get that leg up, that tip.
Well, what's really fascinating is I had a longtime source of mine is the one that told us about Rick Loveday, who is a deputy in in Hinds County. Mm-hmm. And he was basically tortured. They, woke him up and had a gun in his face and accused him of selling drugs. And it's just unreal. Took his gun, took his ammunition. I mean, all this kind of stuff. It was just his phone. I mean, like, he didn't get any of that back. It's just like, since when is theft okay?
Yeah.
But because of that, like just one incident, that actually helped lead Brian and Nate to all those other cases. Whereas that case led to other cases, just word of mouth.
Yeah. And people don't realize too, I think, Jerry, that sometimes one of these stories comes out, the story itself will beget more tips, and it snowballs.
Absolutely.
It just snowballs. And what you thought once was an isolated case suddenly.
Exactly. You think that's something, you find out about it, just hypothetically a bad doctor or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You go, well, wait a minute, let me tell you what he did to me. You know what I mean? And you find out other cases and things like that.
I'll tell you, this is not going to be the last time that we sit down and talk with you. I think that as we, and I don't know exactly how long we're going to have this call out go on. We haven't, it's for the foreseeable future.
We'll see. Foreseeable future.
But it's so important to make sure that if you know somebody who has been, again, impacted, or if you yourself have been, and when I say impacted, I mean, if you're in a situation where you felt like law enforcement acted inappropriately, were your rights violated? Did something happen where you felt that, that it shouldn't have? I mean, we know
you could go through the list of what that was in the information, essentially.
Yeah.
What were what were the things involved with that were broke in without a warrant?
That's right.
Planted evidence, or staged a crime scene, whatever you want to call it, and then you had lying on the report. I mean, all these kinds of things, if you think about them, if this was a pattern of behavior,
Yeah.
this is kind of scary. How many potential wrongful convictions are we talking about here? Are they looking at all the cases that involve all these officers, or how are they going back to look at these cases, if
Right.
at all? Yeah.
And I don't think we've seen, even though the last in-depth report that you and Nate and Brian did, which showed at least for the last 20 years this pattern.
At least
what's scary is that could be just the tip of the iceberg too. We don't know.
Well, I think it is the tip of the iceberg, because those were just picked by word of mouth. So I think that's pretty. Yeah. It's pretty. We'll put it this way: the odds would be that there would be more cases.
If there's one silver lining to all this, it's hopefully that with this reporting already being out there, that it will encourage others to come forward. And that's one of the things that we see that a lot of times in these, not just when it comes to officer misconduct or something this egregious, but anything. People come forward, they feel like they can trust you when they've seen this reporting. And certainly I know a lot of people feel more comfortable sharing their stories about Rankin County law enforcement now in the wake of all this. I hate that it took this happening for people to feel like they could come forward. But thankfully,
like for example, I'll give Rhett McAlpin as an example. I know his name has come up a lot in some cases. Now that he's behind bars, for example, people may feel safer. Hey, let me tell you about my encounter with Rhett McAlpin. I'm just giving him as an individual here on this, but yeah.
I think it's funny that there are a couple of comments. The Mike magazine had this great comment at 141. Jerry is the greatest. He was solving stuff before Google search engines were created. I love that.
That's funny. It is true.
I mean, we have so many more tools at our disposal now, but
they're so, it's funny, we benefit a lot from the internet, and I wouldn't take it away, but it's real funny how not having an internet probably benefited me on some of those cases.
Well, but you also had, just navigating court systems, navigating going in person and talking.
You had to go in person, and
and you could develop relationships with people that way.
Oh, you had to develop relationships with people. But yeah, but I still think it's a great way to do it is go in person and meet people and develop sources that way. So yeah.
I am not the man, but Leon, I appreciate you saying
there
that.
You go.
But I actually wanted to ask you, this is completely off topic.
That's all right.
And I didn't plan on this. It just popped in my head. So heaven help us all. But were you satisfied with your portrayal in The Ghost of Mississippi? Were you satisfied with that?
Well, they did the movie from the perspective of Bobby DeLauder, which is fine.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so that influenced how they kind of portray me as I'll tell this story. It is kind of funny. I had lunch with the producer of the film, Fred Zolo, and he told me, Jerry, we're going to portray you as a pesky reporter. And I remember writing Fred a note after that. I wrote him a note and I said, Dear Fred, I am obnoxious, I'm arrogant, I have all these particular faults, but I'm not pesky. And of course they portray me as pesky. So anyway, it didn't know good at all, but that's okay. I think I'm much better, feel much better about it now. I was a little, at the moment in time, you kind of have to process this, but
that's true.
Am I fine with the portrayal? Sure. They portray me as a pesky reporter. They insult me. My character gets insulted throughout the whole film, but I think it's funny.
Persistent, not pesky.
Yeah.
Persistent.
Yeah. Persistence. Absolutely correct.
Kimberly wanted to ask, what's the best way to deal with talking about law enforcement when clearly they feel they're above the law?
Well, I mean, obviously, if you're within their grasp, I mean, you want to try to stay humble and, deal with the situation hopefully later. But if it ends up being a situation you later on, I mean, obviously someone dealt with you wrongly, you should file a complaint with those particular law enforcement offices. I think that was one of the problems for Rankin, for example, was you know, those complaints about, let's say, law officer abuse were going into Brett McAlpin. They went to the supervisor, well, they were going to Brett McAlpin, for
Yeah.
example. You know, there might be complaints about him, but they went to him, you know?
Yeah.
And so you've got to have a system that's set up to hopefully independently review any kind of situations. And they didn't have that set up, obviously, within their department. I think they have been working on that since, but yeah, it wasn't at the time.
It's just, there's a lot that still, when we talk about, obviously this is a civil investigation from the Department of Justice, but
Right.
That could still unearth information that could lead to criminal investigation and prosecution, though, right? I mean,
yeah, I think so. And that may be the result of all this, but it is a civil investigation right now into policies and practices. And so we'll see what happens. I mean, certainly they're under the gun now.
Yeah.
Yeah. They got a bullseye on them.
Well, and the sheriff too.
Oh, absolutely.
To some degree. Yeah.
Well, as you mentioned earlier, it's not a good situation for him. Either you say, I knew nothing about this, which indicates you're not a very good manager, or you say, oh yeah, I knew about it, which is even worse, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, if any of these cases actually were to proceed to trial and you could benefit from discovery and more information than what we might find in a bill of information,
right?
When there are plea deals and
Sure.
and these people involved end up taking deals, you might actually get more perspective. There's so many questions still left to answer in all this.
A ton of questions, I think,
yeah.
The case. We just know a fraction of, you know, what all happened and what all happened with, you know, various cases and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, Jerry, let's put this up one more time so people can know about
absolutely
how to get a hold of everybody. And you see on the screen there. Oh, sorry, the table here. You can't see it in the shot, but it was like an earthquake. My clumsiness shook everything. You can see our contact information there on the bottom left corner. Also, Mississippi Today's, and you got Jerry's Facebook information there, facebook.com/Jerry Mitchell Reporter, the number 601-533-4860. And also that's Mukta's email address.
That's Mukta's email.
She's working with us.
She's collecting all the emails for us. She's one of our investigative reporters.
And you got her email address there as well. And you got our contact information. Our assistant news director, Emily Caballero, her email address there, and then our number 601-960-4426. And we want to be able to hear from you about this. And again, your identity will remain confidential. Anything that you share with us is going to help our reporting and help us be able to, frankly, get greater context and depth to this reporting.
Well, I think you're kind of breaking through into this hidden world, you know, this Goon Squad's hidden world. And I might add the context on the Goon Squad is that was a term that was coined apparently by Lieutenant Middleton, who's one of the ones that went off to prison for a shift. So it was a particular shift that he was over. And this was, but as Brian and Nate's reporting showed, this was beyond just that particular shift.
Yeah.
So that gives pause in terms of McAlpin was involved in a lot of these incidents. I will say that as well.
He's acting like he's not at this point. He's appealing. He's one of the only
one
of the six who's the only of the six who's appealing.
Yeah, he's
his sentence
and claiming he's wrongly sentenced or overly sentenced or whatever
for what he planned to offer or what have you.
Yeah, exactly.
But and we'll see how that plays out. I think the feds have answered in response to that, but it's still before the Fifth Circuit, so we'll find out in the coming months whether or not they. I was very surprised to see it because whenever you agree, when you plead guilty, you waive your right to an appeal and all of that, and so seems like there's a pretty tough.
You can't appeal your sentencing. That is part of what you can appeal, but whether he'll be successful, I'd say most of those kind of attempts to do that are usually unsuccessful.
Yeah. Jerry, thank you so much for sitting down with us. Was there
having me,
anything
CJ?
that I didn't ask you that
No. I just think this is, I just think in terms of thinking of myself, I don't think I'm very important, but I think the work that we're doing here is incredibly important because people need to know.
Well, and they won't know unless it's put out there. The Mike magazine had mentioned about Sheriff Bailey's warrant to spy on his lover, according to the
Yeah, we
reporting,
reported that
and we
as
never
well.
would have known that had it not been for that reporting. And that's so true.
Yeah. Alyssa Daly and I did that story, and yeah, it's just those are the kind of things you're using your power in essentially a wrongful way.
Yeah. Well, Unfettered Power showed sheriffs from across the state doing that.
Yeah, it wasn't just Sheriff Bailey that we reported on. We reported on Eddie Scott, who's the sheriff up in Clay County. We reported on the sheriff, past sheriff in Noxubee County, who was sentenced to, just the other day, federal prison. So.
Yeah. And there's been some reporting, I think, Daily Journal, Caleb Badillion, who is now at Mississippi. Is he Mississippi?
He's at the Marshall Project.
That's right, Marshall Project. But I don't know if it was while he was at the Daily Journal or once he came over to Marshall. He did that great thing on no-knock warrants.
Yeah, he did that with ProPublica.
Oh, ProPublica, that's right.
Yeah, that's who he did it with.
But it's just
it was great series about the no-knock warrants, and that's a big problem.
Yeah,
and the warrant system itself. I mean, probably don't have that much time to talk about it, but the warrant system itself is a real problem in Mississippi because the federal system is a great example of how it ought to be structured, and it's just not structured or monitored in Mississippi in any way. You've got to have checks and balances in any kind of system, and they just don't exist in a lot of places, including Rankin. I might add Rankin doesn't really have checks and balances on their warrant system, which is, the judge signs a warrant and that's about it. The sheriff keeps it. So, I mean, how do you know? You need to have the return on the warrant connected back up to the judge. And if you don't have that, then how do you know that they actually are using warrants in a lawful way?
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like if we truly knew just how much was not being followed in terms of policy and procedure, and not just in police departments, but in other aspects.
No, all across the board.
We would never run out of stories to report. We would have immense job security because
job security.
It's just there's so much that's happening. It almost feels like it's tough to cover everything.
But it is tough, and that's why we have to pick and choose. But that's why the help from people in the public, we really appreciate it.
Yeah,
because you can really help us. Really get to the bottom of some things that we wouldn't get to otherwise.
Yeah. And I want to address something very quickly. Sometimes people will tell us, they'll say, well, I'm not going to do your job for you. That's not what that is. If you come forward and let us know something, that's you helping us kind of know where to look. And it's not a question of
no, it's not that at all.
No.
It's the more work that people have already done and handing it to us, it's the easier they're making our jobs. Yes. But then that makes it possible for us to take next steps. I know when I worked on a serial killer case, the mother of Annette, one of the women that Felix Vale killed, she basically had a whole, trove of documents that she had saved. Well, that was incredibly helpful. And that was what led me to be able to go. She had the autopsy of the first wife. And if she hadn't saved that, it wouldn't have existed. The case would have never been reopened. So, there you go.
Jerry, thank you so much.
Yeah, it's great to be with you, CJ.
And appreciate you watching today. Kind of a different show format. I promise you, Kara's still here. She's going to be back. She's there. She is in the background. Her hand. She will be back next week, of course, for Wlbt Plus Digital News Desk. And we look forward to hearing from you. And also, we look forward to you reaching out and getting us tips. Again, if you have had this kind of experience with Rankin County law enforcement, or even, as Jerry said, even outside of Rankin County, please let us know so we can continue our reporting. We want to hear from you on this, and it's so important for you to be able to let us know what's going on, if for no other reason than to make sure that it doesn't happen to somebody else.
Yeah, that's part of the reason. You don't want this to continue.
Yeah. Jerry Mitchell with the Mississippi Center for Investigative Reporting at Mississippi Today. Yeah. Thanks for joining us today. And we will, I guess, 2:30, is there going to be a weather update? Okay. Our meteorologists, the First Alert Weather Team, are going to be in here giving you an idea of what to expect this weekend, hotter temperatures and all that. And, of course, we will see you at 4, 5, and 6 right there on the set. So thanks for joining us and have a great day.